So that rate at which prices are rising, or inflation, is now at 4%. So prices on the shelves are quite stagnant at the moment, which should be good news for consumers, but they are still feeling the pinch. And joining me now to talk more about the inflation outlook is Mpho Tsebe, an economist at RMB. Mpho, as I was saying there, this should be a little bit of a reprieve for the South African consumer, but they are still feeling the pinch, lots of headwinds that they're still dealing with.
Yeah, so the number came out much lower than we had anticipated, but mainly pushed down by the fuel cut that we saw in August. But we then saw your electricity and water tariffs come up quite significantly, still increasing by double digit. So hence, the tax burden onto consumers remains and continues to eat into discretionary spending.
So given what you've just mentioned here, even if inflation continues to ease over the next few periods, this is something consumers may not feel, but might we see a rate cut from the Reserve Bank?
I think a rate cut remains uncertain at the moment. Our view is that the SARB is going to keep rates on hold because of the global uncertainty, but also because of the fiscal pressures. So we have the October budget statement that National Treasury will be presenting, and we expect them to show wider deficits. So that's going to put a lot of pressure on the currency and funding needs as well. So there's a lot of uncertainty looming. We also have the Moody's rating due in November, and we're expecting an outlook change. So the SARB will trade more cautiously and keep rates on hold. And also, if we look at inflation, the risks are to the upside than to the downside. If we look at fuel prices, for instance, so they increased again in August, we're also looking at another 10-cent increase in September because the depreciation in the currency has offset the lower oil prices.
But what about those global catalysts? We are seeing central banks globally looking at an easing in terms of a monetary policy stance. Would we not take some direction from them?
Yeah, so the global environment would definitely be some positive catalyst for South Africa, but I think it remains uncertain in terms of how aggressive the Fed is going to cut. So I think the market is currently pricing in about 2 to 3 more cuts for this year, but if that does not pan out, then the market is going to have to pay back those expectations. So given that uncertainty and the trade tensions, we don't know if they're coming or going, continues to create uncertainty and depress sentiment, which is negative for growth overall.
This might be a bizarre question to ask, but is there a possibility that we may see a turnaround? Putting aside the tariff increases that we've seen, could we see a stronger rand, some more positive local catalysts that may prompt the SARB to perhaps ease that burden on consumers?
I think the positive catalyst at the moment remains around fiscal policy. I think government really needs to rethink fiscal policy because if you look at it now, it's quite restrictive to growth. If you look at the tax burden is increasing on consumers, but if you look at where that expenditure is going, it's not going towards growth-enhancing expenditure. So I think fiscal policy, government needs to rethink fiscal policy. We also need more political will to stimulate to ramp up sentiment, because sentiment remains quite depressed at the moment. And if sentiment remains depressed, we're not going to see investment. So I think it's a sentiment story. If we see some political will, some proper policy decisions being made, growth-enhancing policies being implemented, then we can get that domestic catalyst.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time. I've been speaking there to Mpho Tsebe, economist at RMB.